Good morning. Welcome to the second panel discussion of today's Prague European Summit. We will basically follow up on the preceding panel on the future of digital Europe, because our aim is to present the Prague European Summit study, which is titled "What is Wrong with the Single European Market and How to Move Forward Towards a service and digital market." Do not get surprised not to find the study in your files, in your agendas. This is intentional, since the study will be only published as a part of the summary to the Prague European Summit that will follow shortly in a couple of days to weeks after the Prague European Summit. So what you find in your files is just the annotation of the study, and the full study, stay tuned for that, because it will be published after the summit, as I said. It's my pleasure to welcome the two authors. We'll start from my right, which is your left, with Petra, Dzurovčinová, and Adéla, Zábražná. They're both from the Slovak Alliance for the Innovative Economy, which I will introduce briefly very shortly. But about Petra, she's basically now the executive manager of SAPIE. Previously, she has worked as a digital communication manager at the Royal Institution of Australia, and has studied at various places from Bratislava in Slovakia to Bretagne in France and Seoul in Korea. Adéla has previously worked in KPMG Consulting here in Prague, and also European Values think tank, also based here in Prague, and studied at the University of Economics in Prague, and afterwards at the Catholic University in Leuven. Very briefly, the Slovak Alliance for the Innovative Economy basically represents the needs of global, Slovak, and also regional innovative companies. It aims to improve the state of IT education, boost the startup ecosystem, and also help companies scale to the global level. Now, very briefly about the structure. Firstly, we will start with presentation of the study, which will take like up to 10 minutes. And then the floor will be open to discussions, questions and discussion, both questions from the Slido as well as from the audience. Actually, Slido is part of SAPIE. It's a Slovak startup, which very well connects to our paper. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Adéla, who will present the study. So Adéla, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Honza. And thank you all for attending. Since we had a panel that was covering quite a lot of what will be written also in the paper, I will very briefly summarize the main findings and mainly the recommendations that we present in our paper. Our paper examines basically the limits of current level of market integration in the 5 fields. So in goods, services, and the 3 factors of production, which is labor, capital, as you know, and the third, and still more importantly, knowledge and technology transfer. We based our paper on the hypothesis that, as you all know, services and digital economy present still the more of the GDP of the European Union. And as we know, a regulation or liberalization of these sectors is rather obsolete or non-existent in these sectors. So the more we have services and digital economy, the less of the actual European single market we currently have. I will very briefly jump to the recommendations. The recommendations that we propose are we divided them into 2 fields. One field of recommendation concerns the actual European single market and the way forward. And the second set of recommendations is concretely for the digital single market initiative, for it to make it feasible and the execution also successful, as we see it from the point of view of innovative economy. The European single market, I very much like the paper from Jacques Pelkmans, who is a great advocate of the European single market reform. And he says that when we want to reform the European single market, we should look at it from the functional point of view and see the reform as a resolution of what is currently not working, then prevention of happening that again, and then finally completing what is incomplete currently in the European single market. So what we propose in our paper, the first recommendation is the resolution to revise the current body of regulation and see whether there are areas in which we could transform the ill-defined or malfunctioning regulation in order to serve better to the economy and enhance competitiveness. For example, there is an initiative called REFIT. I'm sure you know it. Regulatory fitness, stakeholder-driven initiative, and this initiative on a smaller scale tries to revisit the regulation and implement some improvements from the stakeholder point of view. So this is a way forward in the resolution part. Then the second arm, or the second part of the reform should be prevention. So to prevent the regulation to create implicit discrimination for SMEs. As we know, for example, it was mentioned also in the panel before, that the GDPR poses unproportionately higher burden on the small and medium enterprises than on the large companies. So the small and medium enterprises will have to face additional costs to comply actually with this regulation. This is not the only case, there's many cases. For example, the REACH regulation in the chemical industry. So this is, the preventive arm should focus on implementing the SME test to ex ante control whether, or check whether the regulation has, or directive has a serious impact on the SMEs and on competitiveness, and deal with it beforehand, not afterwards. And then the third, of course, is again what we touched already before in the discussion, which is complete the incomplete. To complete the European single market, it's necessary to liberalize and harmonize the network services of general interests that are highly regulated by the national governments. We see the way forward with the European single market not through cherry-picking the areas to liberalize, but to liberalize on the larger scale in order to allow the digital economy to flourish. And now let's go to the digital single market reforms, also reforms maybe already. But as we know, digital single market strategy has been proposed a couple of years ago, and the optimistic scenario says that in 2021 we might have the first legislative acts implemented by the national governments, which is in 4 years from now. So as we can imagine, in such a dynamic field as technology and digital economy, it's quite a long time. So we propose that we first need to find advocates on the European national states level that will advocate the idea of digital Europe. Then the second, we need to have a policy that actually is state-of-the-art of digital economy. And the third is to create an infrastructure, the infrastructure in terms of education, digital education, that will be up to date with the newest development, and then digital government and digital diplomacy. Digital government in terms of digital by default and leading by example. So the government has to be serving the digital economy, not not the other way around. And then finally, the digital diplomacy. So we need to tackle the issues, the main issues of digital world that has no borders through an action that is led from the above, not on the level of the national state. So that would be briefly for the recommendations. I'm sure we are able to touch upon anything that I said and we are going to say in the discussion. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adéla, for the presentation of the paper, and I'll now open the floor to the discussion. And so I can see a question on Slido, which basically connects to what you have said. I will probably start with Slido, because you mentioned that we should not as you labeled it, cherry pick areas for liberalization or completion of single market. And there was a question, and I would maybe reframe it a little bit. What is the logic behind not cherry picking, or why is not wise to create a digital single market without completing or liberalizing the field of services, network services, services of general interest, and other types of services? Where is the correlation? What is the logic behind it? What is the rationale behind it?
Do you want to?
Anybody who wants to address?
We will probably jump in both. So, yeah. So, good morning. Still, I would maybe when we were thinking about the digital world, it can't function without the offline world. So, the digital services are closely connected to telecoms, to postal services, to general services industry, and the manufacturing as such. So it's all connected, and you can't create separate rules for the offline world and the online world. They are more and more intertwined, and they would need to work together to actually create something feasible that is valuable in a global competition. Because we can't think of Europe as an island. We are competing with the US, we are competing with the very fast-growing Asian countries, and from our perspective, we need to look at the whole market, not just the digital as such. Not sure if you have anything else.
Would you like to add, Adéla, anything?
When talking about the offline versus the online world, we need to think that the digital companies still will need to be using the infrastructure of the network industries, for example, the telecommunications and so on. So if we are talking about the very popular catchphrases like smart homes, smart industries, smart cities right now, it's still based on the old infrastructure of telecommunications. The data transfer goes through the wires that are actually from the old network industry. So we need to think about it in this perspective and see that the new economy can benefit from the old infrastructure that is currently in place, and we need to liberalize access to this infrastructure in order to be able to develop the new one. So that is just a brief comment.
Okay. I will probably use the opportunity that you're both from the Slovak Alliance for the Innovative Economy. We have a question on what are the key elements of successful innovation policy, well, let's say in the context of the European single market and economic integration in Europe in general.
Maybe I would jump into this one. From our perspective, the technology world is changing so fast that the policy is only playing catch-up. When you look at blockchain, when you look at cybersecurity and all the other technological disruptions, they are changing so quickly that policy can't kind of catch up with, implementation in 2021. So what we think should be the way is a collaboration between the private and public sector, kind of creating anticipatory regulation that works with the companies and doesn't try to fix the market failure that hasn't happened just yet, allows the industry to develop, to flourish, create legislative sandboxes like the one in the UK with fintech, where you can experiment, see where the industry is going, and then you can start regulating. You can look at all the different perspectives from data protection to protecting consumers and so on. So it will all kind of come together, but there is a need for cooperation between the public and the private sector, and regulators need to understand the technology. That's a very important thing, and the business models behind it. Because without that understanding, they won't know what is behind, what is the motivation of entrepreneurs, and where could be the flaws of the technology. Maybe one thing on the side note is we should look at self-regulation. Internet started as something very positive. It was kind of a safe haven. It was a way to communicate. It was a way to connect the world. So we should kind of encourage entrepreneurs to self-regulate and try to create rules that would work for everyone involved. I know there is always someone who's trying to cheat the system, but you can, avoid that. And
And one more comment is we should have simple principles, but we should be able to create, maybe this would sound counterproductive, but complex regulation, because out of something very simple there can be a complex system like blockchain. We don't know what it will be used for in the future. So let's start with something simple and let's build really strong basis which we can build on.
You want to jump in?
No, not
add
now.
anything? Okay. Thank you for the answer. And I may now look to the audience. Do we have any questions in the audience on the digital single market and integration of services in Europe? Well, I don't see any, so...
If not, then maybe I would jump back into the innovation policy question.
Okay, jump in, feel free.
There's one more thing that may actually sound very unrealistic, but we need to, when I was speaking about the proponents and the advocates for the European digital agenda and for the European digital policy, we should be able in the European Union to take the good examples of existing systems of regulation and innovation support also from abroad, first of all, and then the advocates within the European Union, as for example is the Digital Nine, which is a group of countries, informal group of countries who are digital leaders within the EU who are trying to push the agenda forward. These are the key elements that would drive the digital policy forward, because these countries actually do have a lot of experience with startup support, scaling up of the businesses, driving them global, helping them grow. And there is one more very nice example from the Israel, and I think that in the European Union we've already had a lot of funds for a lot of things. And there is this example from Israel when Israeli government decided to make an unprecedented move to co-finance the venture capital and angel capital with the same amount of money from the governmental fund for a short period of time. So when a venture capitalist decided to invest his money into a startup, the government paid the same amount, gave it to the company in order to have enough funding for a couple of years to scale actually and to grow bigger. So this is something that the EU could at least try to implement, and similarly to what we have now with the strategic fund for European Fund of Strategic Investments, we could also have a fund for supporting venture capital to fund the small growing perspective companies. So this is one of the practical examples of the innovation policy that could work and that has worked in the past already.
Well, sounds reasonable. Connects to what Petra said about the private-public sector cooperation. This is very much at a practical level, and following examples, well-established examples worldwide, is definitely a way forward. Now, I see we have a question at Slido, and there was one that just disappeared right now. But there is a question, it's been about robotics, but I don't recall it anymore. But we'll take the one, how will the regulation of OTT providers affect the digital single market? It's definitely an interesting question.
Well, it's a good example. There was a discussion about Uber and Airbnb and all these new technologies. So it's actually an opportunity. I won't look at regulation for OTTs, but it's an opportunity to liberalize telecoms services, because the rules should apply for everyone. But this is kind of an example, or to show us that the rules might be too stringent for 21st century. So it's actually an opportunity to open up rules and liberalize them for everyone. So OTTs have the same ones as telecoms. They can use the networks. They have same responsibilities. Maybe it will open it up to new startups, and the rules will be simpler, so they can actually start providing these different services and grow in Europe. I think you mentioned the question about the one you liked. It was about AI. And
yeah, it was about AI.
I looked at the one, and
Feel free to connect to it, because it's been about the regulation of artificial intelligence and robotics and
yes,
these issues.
Exactly. Actually, when I was preparing for the paper and for this presentation, there was an interesting article about actually government accelerators and how the industry and startups are working with the government to prepare regulation for new technologies. There was a autonomous vehicle policy in 2013 in the US, and it's been prepared together with the industry. There is a council on artificial intelligence in the US, and I believe we were either building it or it's already here in the EU. So it's rather than thinking about regulation, it's more about the principles that are guiding the whole industry and working with the people who are developing it, because they have a deep knowledge of where it is, where it's going, and what are the ideas, the broader sense. Because when you look at Uber now, it's like a taxi service, but in future years it's going to be mobility as a service. They're thinking about their own cars. So where is the industry going? Where are the leaders kind of pushing the whole disruption? So it's about kind of comparing their vision with where the country wants to be, what is the role of the state, and how they can help, how they can educate citizens, how they can help them use the services the best they can. So,
okay, would you like to step in? No. I may now once again open the floor for the questions from the audience, if you have any. Otherwise, I will stick to Slido. I don't see any raised hands, so I will look at a, let's say, regional question that is down there. Do you think that Central and Eastern European countries stand the chance of being digital leaders like front-runner D9 countries, or be able to join these groups of countries permanently? Because it's an interesting regionally focused question on our region.
Well, the D9 is actually composed by Benelux countries, some Nordic countries, there's Sweden, I think, and Denmark, and then Baltics. So the Baltic countries are part of the Digital 9. The Baltic countries are actually doing quite well in terms of innovation policy, as we also heard from.
So let's try to focus on Central Europe.
And the Central Europe, sometimes these countries are also added to the Central Europe, but Central and Eastern. But the Czech Republic, and I think it was Bulgaria, also joined forces with the D9 in the letter that they addressed to the European Commission. So of course they can. There is the geographic position is very good. So we have Ukraine that is very close. Also geographically and culturally, so we can gain also from the economies of scale of gaining some very well-skilled labor from the Eastern Europe that is not part of the European Union. And the CEE countries, of course, have a lot of very interesting examples of successful startups that grew to scale up. So I believe that we can, but we would have to cooperate more on the regional level. And create some kind of a public-private partnership, or more private-public partnership that would be led by private and would influence also European policies in a way.
I just wanted to add that recently I've been to Poland and speaking to Polish policymakers, they're actually making huge steps to move towards innovation policy, and they are a great example for our countries to actually see that within 1 year you can actually create really good policy and encourage innovation and start the cooperation with public-private universities, VCs, and so on. So that might be a good example which can be easily implemented in the V4.
Thank you. Well, I will not hold you from lunch for that long anymore, but since we started a bit later than planned in the program, I will use the remaining time to ask one or two other questions and answer them within 5 minutes time. So the question and it has been touched upon in the previous panel partly on Digital Europe, is how long will it take to create a level playing field within the EU with regards to shipping and delivery costs, because this is very, let's say, material or substantive question for a lot of people who may be ordering from abroad, and shipping and delivery costs are important part of the cost of purchases, online purchases especially, that are delivered offline. So how would you comment on that question?
This is again a very complex question that touches upon the network services, the services of general interest, and then the digital economy. Because if we look at geo-blocking, it's partially also due to when the company, when the retailer, for example, blocks sale of his goods or services abroad. It's also partially due to higher services costs, shipping and delivery costs, and administrative costs that are connected to, for example, consumer protection. So I don't think how long it could take. But it should be the first step to take in order to complete the digital, or start the digital single market. Because now if we look at, if you want to send a letter from Italy to Austria, it costs you twice as much as sending it from Austria to Italy. That says a lot.
Well, and I've seen the comment on Hungry Man, so one very last, but feel free to leave if you're too hungry to stay for 2 more minutes. One last question that basically is not from Slido, but it's my personal question to you. We have, well, until tomorrow, roaming should have been cancelled by all providers of services, cell phone services. But still, some of them can charge roaming as long as they prove that you're using the cell phone for a long period of time, not in the country where you bought it, but in another country. And my question is, in future, should we head towards completely abolishing any roaming regulation, in the sense that we should, as customers, be able to buy services, telecommunication services in terms of using cell phones anywhere in any country in European Union, regardless where we will eventually use it?
Maybe I will turn the question around and say...
Turn it around, feel free.
It's a business opportunity. If you are like a telecoms provider and you want to find new customers, for example, let's look at Slovakia and Austria. Capital is really close to the border, so you can actually cover it with your Austrian provider. And Austrian telecom providers are much cheaper than the ones in Slovakia. So it's a business opportunity for the ones in Austria to say, okay, we're going to serve this new untapped market, which we can do right now. So it's up to them. I mean, legislation is there to set the table, and it's up to you how you use it, how you use the opportunity. And we have a tendency in Europe to actually move towards protectionism rather than using it as an opportunity to build new businesses and actually finding an opportunity in it. So
okay, it's been a well turned upside down the question. Adéla, would you like to add anything?
No, thank you. I think.
No, then I will thank the audience for being here with us for the discussion of the Prague European Summit study. And I will thank the 2 wonderful ladies from Slovakia who have written the paper and who were available today for the discussion about the future of service market integration in Europe. So once again, thank you, as well as thank the audience, and we're all free to go to grab the lunch so that we don't get hungry anymore. Thank you.